What if Judas had asked for forgiveness? The story nobody told. 30 pieces of silver. That was the price, not of just any betrayal, but of the betrayal that changed the history of the entire world, that divided time into before and after, that set in motion the cross, the resurrection, and everything that came after. Judas Iscariot betrayed Jesus with a kiss, pocketed the dirty money, left with the weight of the universe on his shoulders, and then, well, we know what happened, don't we? He returned the coins, ran away, found a tree, and hanged himself. End of story. End of Judas. But what if it hadn't been? What if, in that brutal moment of absolute despair, when guilt was already devouring him alive from the inside, when remorse was so great he could barely breathe, Judas had made a completely different decision? What if, instead of tying that rope around his neck, he had fallen to his knees in the dust, torn his clothes, raised his eyes to heaven, and shouted with all his might, "Father, I was wrong. Forgive me." Sounds crazy? Maybe. But think about it. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, blatantly, with profanity, and all and became the leader of the church, the rock, the man. Judas betrayed him once and became eternally synonymous with traitor, the name no one wants to give their son. What's the real difference between the two? One asked for forgiveness, the other didn't. So the question that begs to be asked, what if Judas had asked? Welcome to another episode of The Story Would Be Different If, the channel where we take those Bible stories you memorized in Sunday school, that you know by heart, and ask a very dangerous question. What if things had turned out differently? What if someone had zigzagged instead of going straight? What if one choice, a single choice, had changed everything? Today, we're going to deal with one of the most hated, most cursed, most misunderstood figures in the entire Bible, and imagine the absolutely impossible Judas repentant, Judas forgiven, Judas, well, alive. Let's go back to that night. The Garden of Gethsemane, a heavy atmosphere, torches burning in the darkness, Roman soldiers armed to the teeth, religious authorities hungry for blood. Judas approaches Jesus, gives him the kiss, that cursed kiss, the kiss that would go down in history as the ultimate symbol of betrayal, and Jesus is arrested on the spot, dragged away like any common criminal. Up to this point, everything is exactly as we know it. But now comes the interesting part, the part where we start to twist the story. Instead of Judas simply disappearing into the crowd, vanishing into the darkness, counting pennies, he stands there frozen, watching Jesus being dragged through the streets of Jerusalem, and something breaks violently inside him. It's not just remorse, it's complete devastation. The kind of pain that tears the soul apart. Because it's one thing to betray someone you think will manage, who has a secret plan up their sleeve, who will summon 12 legions of angels and blow everything up in a show of celestial power. It's something completely different to see someone bleeding, silent, being spat on, being humiliated, and realizing right then he's not going to react. He knew I was going to do this, and I did it anyway. Judas falls to his knees right there, amidst the dirty dust of Jerusalem, while the soldiers leave with Jesus in chains. He sobs, tears his clothes, throws the 30 coins on the ground as if each one burned his skin like live embers. The despair is so great that he can't even stand. And then comes the absolutely decisive moment, the moment that changes everything. Instead of running to any tree and ending it all at once, instead of choosing death as a solution, he runs the other way. He runs straight to Golgotha, to the place of the skull, to the place of execution. He arrives there dirty, desperate, stumbling over his own feet, falling at the foot of the cross that is still being erected, and cries out with all the strength he still has in his throat, "Lord, forgive me. Primera abe. Sinned, I have betrayed innocent blood. I know what I did. Forgive me. Please, forgive me." And now, what happens now? Because Jesus, even nailed to that cursed wood, even suffocating under his own weight, even dying slowly, still has breath, still has the strength to say, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Would he include Judas in this? Would that brutal, scandalous, incomprehensible forgiveness also reach the repentant traitor down there? Would grace work even for the one who sold the Son of God for 30 pieces of silver? Let's imagine that's the case. Let's imagine that Jesus, with swollen eyes and a bleeding mouth, looks down and sees Judas destroyed and whispers with difficulty, "Judas is forgiven." 3 words. Just 3 words. And the whole world turns upside down, because now Judas doesn't die hanged on that lonely tree. He stays alive, he witnesses the resurrection. And when Jesus appears in the upper room, amidst the terrified disciples, locked in fear of the Romans, Judas is there too, trembling, ashamed to the core, but he's there. And the atmosphere becomes strange, heavy, tense. The other disciples look at him with a mixture of anger, disgust, confusion, and envy. Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times with insults and all, feels a strange unease growing in his chest. Wait, I was forgiven easily, like super easily. But this guy here, who handed Jesus over on a silver platter, who caused all this, is also going to get forgiveness like that? The atmosphere becomes even more tense. Thomas glances sideways. John crosses his arms. But Jesus, being Jesus, places his hand on Judas' shoulder, that shoulder still trembling with fear and shame, and says loudly, for everyone to hear, "If I forgave you, if I, who was betrayed, forgave you, who are you? Who do you think you are to not forgive?" And there you have it. Now you have Judas as your official disciple again. Judas, the redeemed traitor. Judas, who knows darkness better than any other human being there. Judas, who now preaches in the streets of Jerusalem with a bizarre, almost frightening authority, because he can look into the eyes of the worst sinners, the most lost, the most broken, and say with certainty, "I know exactly where you are now. I've been in that hole. I've sunk deeper than you." And there is forgiveness. There is always forgiveness. But here comes the big problem, the problem no one wants to face. The early church didn't know what to do with him. How do you transform the guy who literally sold Jesus into an apostle? How do you write a letter signed by St. Judas? How do you explain this to the new converts who arrive excitedly and ask, "Who's that over there?" "Oh, yes, that's Judas, who betrayed the Messiah to the Romans. But now he leads the church in Antioch." Super chill. Imagine the awkwardness in the meetings. Imagine the gossip in the hallways. Imagine the violent theological arguments. "Peter, do you really think he should be preaching?" Like, seriously. And the tension only increases because Judas, now forgiven and restored, becomes a walking symbol of a truth that is absolutely unbearable for many people. There is no sin too great for God to forgive. If you're feeling the weight of this completely absurd alternate history, subscribe to the channel right now, because we're only just beginning to deconstruct and reconstruct the biblical timeline, and this is deeply unsettling. It affects everyone, because if even Judas, the ultimate traitor, the guy who kissed Jesus and betrayed him to death, can be forgiven, then nobody, absolutely nobody, has an excuse to say, "Oh, I did too much. God doesn't want me anymore. I went too far." Judas is living proof, breathing, walking the streets, that grace is greater, much greater than any tragedy. And this is both liberating and utterly terrifying. But let's talk about the chaos this would cause, because it wouldn't be simple or peaceful at all. The news that Judas was alive, forgiven, and preaching the gospel would spread like wildfire. The synagogues would panic. The Pharisees, who already hated Jesus, would now have a new target. Did you see? Now even the traitor is out there saying he's been forgiven. This is a cult of lunatics. And they wouldn't be entirely wrong to be confused, because think about it. How do you process this theologically? How do you explain that the guy who caused the Messiah's death is now at the forefront of the movement? Inside the church itself, things would get tense, very tense. James, Jesus' brother, would look at Judas with that "I saw my brother die because of you" look, and would have to swallow the forgiveness down his throat. Peter, always explosive, would have outbursts of "Why do I feel guilty for denying him?" But he betrayed him and is doing just fine. And the new converts, the new converts would be the biggest problem. Imagine arriving at church for the first time, all excited, and someone pointing, "That one over there is Judas Iscariot." You would freeze. Like, that Judas? Yes, that one. The one with the kiss. Exactly. Judas would have to live with the weight of his name forever. Every city he entered, someone would whisper, "It's him, the traitor." Children would ask their parents, "Mom, why does everyone look at that man so strangely?" And Judas would have to swallow it, lower his head, and carry on. Because forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Forgiveness doesn't erase memory. He would be free from guilt, but never free from fame. And here comes an interesting twist. Judas would begin preaching specifically to the worst cases. He wouldn't go after the religious, the righteous, those already on the right path. No, he would go straight to the brothels, the alleys, the criminals, the murderers, those everyone else had already given up on, because he knew, he felt in his own skin what it was like to be at rock bottom, to look up and see no way out. And when he preached, it wasn't with pretty words, elaborate theology, or inspiring speeches. It was raw. It was real. It was like, "I killed the Son of God with my choices, and He forgave me. If He forgave me, He forgives you, too." And you know what would happen? The most broken people, those whom everyone else had thrown away, would begin to convert in droves, because, for the first time, someone was speaking their language. For the first time. It wasn't a saint saying, "Come and be cleansed." It was someone dirty saying, "I too was in the mud." And there is hope. Judas would become the apostle of the rejected, the evangelist of the hopeless, the preacher of those whom everyone hates. But this would create another gigantic problem. The church would begin to divide. On one side, you would have the followers of Peter, John, and James, respected people. People who walked with Jesus from the beginning. People with impeccable credentials. On the other side, you would have the followers of Judas, former thieves, former prostitutes, former murderers, people whom society despised. And the tension between these two groups would be explosive. The original disciples would look at the disciples of Judas with suspicion. Have these people really changed, or is it all just talk? And the disciples of Judas would look at the originals with resentment. "You do you and know what it is like to be at the bottom. You don't understand." And in the midst of all this, Judas would have to deal with something even worse. His own mind, because divine forgiveness is one thing. Self-forgiveness is something completely different. Jesus could have said, "You are forgiven," there on the cross. But that didn't mean Judas could look in the mirror without seeing the traitor. He would wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, seeing that kiss again and again and again. He would wash his hands and feel the weight of the 30 pieces of silver. He would preach about grace during the day and cry alone at night, whispering, "Why? Why did I do that?" And the other disciples would notice. Peter, one of those nights, would find Judas sitting alone on a dark corner, staring into nothingness, and would sit beside him. And perhaps, just perhaps, at that moment, Peter would say, "I can't forget either. I still hear the rooster crowing to this day." And Judas would look at him, tears streaming down his face, and for the first time someone would understand, because both carried the weight of betrayal. The difference is that one denied out of fear, and the other betrayed him out of... why? Exactly. Greed. Disillusionment. Desperation. To this day, nobody really knows. But here's the central point of all this. The core of this whole story. If Judas had been forgiven, the message of the gospel would have changed forever. It would no longer be good and God will accept you. It would be you can be the worst human being on the planet, and still there is hope. The church wouldn't be a club for saints. It would be a hospital for sinners. And that would scare a lot of people, because it's easier to deal with a God who forgives little sins than with a God who forgives even those who killed His own Son. Judas alive and forgiven would be the most radical, most dangerous, most disturbing proof of grace. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's why history didn't turn out that way. If this plot twist really got you, leave a like here now, because we haven't reached total chaos yet. Notice. Because imagine the theological mess that would cause in subsequent generations. Imagine the church fathers, centuries later, trying to explain this to the faithful. So, about Judas. Well, it's complicated. Augustine would have a nervous breakdown trying to fit this into the doctrine of predestination. Thomas Aquinas would write 3 volumes just trying to understand how someone can betray God and still be saved. The debates would be endless, violent, full of shouting and mutual accusations. And do you know what the biggest nightmare would be? Judas's letters. That's right, because if he were alive, he would write letters to the churches just like Peter, Paul, and John. And imagine opening the New Testament and finding their letter of Judas Iscariot to the Corinthians. The embarrassment would be cosmic, and the content of those letters would be absolutely disturbing, because Judas wouldn't write about systematic theology, about organized doctrine, about proper behavior. He would write about betrayal, about guilt, about the hell that is living with one's own choices. They would be the darkest, ruest, most honest letters in the entire New Testament. He would write something like, "Brothers, I know what it is to look God in the eye and choose money. I know what it is to kiss the face of grace and surrender it to death. And if I, who have done this, am here writing to you, then none of you are too far gone." And these words would spread, be copied, read aloud in churches, and cause a commotion. Some would say, "This is inspired. This is liberating." Others would tear up the letter and shout, "This is heresy. Judas cannot speak for God." But the greatest impact would be in the streets, far from the synagogues and organized churches. Because while religious people debated theology, Judas would be out there in the dark alleys of Rome, Ephesus, and Antioch, encountering people whom everyone else had abandoned. He would enter a den of thieves, sit on the dirty floor, and say, "I stole more than you. I stole the life of the Son of God." And the thieves would stop, look, and perhaps for the first time feel that someone truly understood them. He would find a prostitute crying in a corner, despised, used, and he would say, "I sold the body of Christ for 30 pieces of silver. Do you think what you did is worse?" And she would look up, incredulous, because no one had ever spoken to her like that. And she would begin to cry in a different way, out of despair, but out of relief. He would look into the eyes of a murderer and say, "My hands also have blood on them." And Jesus washed them anyway. And the murderer, who was absolutely certain that he was condemned forever, would feel something break inside his chest. Something like hope. And this ministry of Judas, this raw and devastating way of preaching, would begin to bother the authorities in a completely new way. Because Peter bothered them by preaching resurrection. Paul bothered them by preaching grace to the Gentiles. But Judas bothered them by preaching forgiveness for the unforgivable. And that was too dangerous, too explosive. Because if even Judas can be forgiven, then the entire structure of moral power collapses. You can no longer use guilt as control. You can no longer say you are too unclean to approach God. Judas was the walking refutation of that. And a time would come when the Roman Empire, fed up with these crazy Christians, would put Judas at the top of its wanted list, not because he was militarily dangerous, but because he was becoming a symbol of something uncontrollable, radical redemption. And in an empire that functioned on the basis of fear, shame, and hierarchy, that was pure poison. They would arrest Judas one night, throw him into a dark cell, and the interrogation would be bizarre. The centurion would look at him and say, "You betrayed your own God. Why are you still alive? Why didn't you kill yourself like every traitor should?" And Judas, chained and wounded, would answer, "Because he told me I was worth more alive than dead." And the centurion wouldn't know what to make of that answer. They would try to execute him as a martyr, but Judas would refuse to die as a hero. He would say, "Don't make me a saint. I am not a saint. I am the worst of all, and yet I was saved." And this phrase, this refusal to be elevated, to be sanctified, would cause even more confusion, because Christian martyrs died shouting victory, shouting faith. Judas would die shouting unworthiness and still be saved. And when they finally executed him, because Rome always executed, in the end something strange would happen. The most despised people in society, those who lived in the shadows, those whom no one looked in the eye, would appear in droves at his funeral. Hundreds of them. Perhaps thousands. People whom Judas had touched, people whom he had looked in the eye and said, "You are not lost forever." And there, at that bizarre funeral, full of former thieves, former prostitutes, former murderers, all weeping for a former traitor, the message of the gospel would become clearer than ever. It's not about being good enough. It never was. It's about being broken enough to realize that you need grace. Peter would be there, watching the crowd from afar, and perhaps, for the first time, he would fully understand why Jesus forgave Judas. Because it wasn't about Judas. It was about everyone who would look at Judas' story and think, if he had a chance, then I have one too. Antisidea, this seed planted at the death of Judas, would grow in a way that no one expected. It would become legend, a whisper in the streets, the story that mothers would tell their children when they thought they had done too much wrong. Remember Judas? Even he was forgiven. If this story gave you goose, share it now, because there are people who need to hear that no mistake is greater than grace. But the truth, the hard, raw, and devastating truth, is that Judas did not ask for forgiveness. He did not fall to his knees. He did not cry out to heaven. He did not run to Golgotha. He chose the rope. He chose eternal silence. He chose to believe, with every fiber of his being, that what he had done was too great, too heavy, too dirty, too horrible to be forgiven. And that choice, that last brutal act of despair, changed everything. Because Judas did not become a symbol of redemption, he became a symbol of irreversible tragedy. The man who was exactly 3 words away from complete salvation. Father, forgive me. 3 words, that's all. Just 3 words. But he didn't say them. He didn't try. He simply gave up. And perhaps that's exactly why Judas' story hurts so much even today. Why it hurts in a different way. Why it disturbs so deeply. It's not because he betrayed, because let's be honest, Peter also betrayed in a different way. But he betrayed in the same way. Terrea pain, what truly cuts the soul, lies in the simple and terrible fact that Judas gave up before even trying. He looked at the cross being raised, saw Jesus bleeding and dying, and thought that was the absolute end of everything. He didn't wait. He lacked patience. He didn't stay to see that death isn't the end of the story. That 3 days can change absolutely everything. That even the most sealed, most closed, most guarded tomb can violently open and give life back. And now, here we are, 2,000 years later, still racking our brains over this question that won't go away, that echoes through the centuries. What if he had stayed? What if he had swallowed all the shame, chewed on all the guilt, held back despair with both hands and simply stayed? What if he had waited just 3 more days? How many lives throughout history would have been touched by his testimony? How many to lost? How many to far away? How many to dirty would have found real, tangible hope in his living testimony? How many people throughout these 2 millennia would look at the story of Judas Iscariot and say with tears in their eyes, if even he could start over, if even he had a second chance, then I can too. Then there is still hope for me. But Judas chose to believe the oldest lie in the world, the lie Satan has been whispering since Eden. The deadly lie that there is sin too great for God to handle, that there is stain too deep to be washed away, that there is betrayal too grave to be forgiven. And this lie, this silent poison, killed Judas long before the noose tightened around his neck. Because the glaring truth, the truth he couldn't see or didn't want to see, is that Jesus already knew everything. Jesus always knew. From the beginning, and even so, even knowing that Judas would betray him in a few hours, he washed Judas's feet at that Last Supper. He knelt on the ground, took those feet that would walk to the garden to betray the Master, and washed them carefully, lovingly, with a tenderness impossible to comprehend, knowing exactly, perfectly what would come next. And if that isn't an explicit, desperate, passionate invitation to forgiveness, then honestly, what else could it be? But Judas didn't see it. Or perhaps he did see it and couldn't believe it, and he ran out of that upper room, straight into the darkest, coldest, loneliest night of his life, carrying those 30 cursed coins that burned the palms of his hands like live embers, obsessively thinking that this was the total and complete end, thinking that there was no turning back, thinking that betrayal was the definitive end of the story, thinking that he had crossed a line that could not be and here is the great irony, the absolutely devastating irony of it all. The irony that cuts like a knife. Judas' betrayal was part of the divine plan. Jesus needed to be handed over somehow. Someone, at some point, had to make it happen. And Judas did. But and pay attention to this huge but. This does not mean, it never meant, that he was predestined, condemned, obliged to die in suicidal despair. He could very well have been the redeemed traitor of history. He could have been the walking, breathing, screaming proof that even those who deliver Jesus into the hands of enemies can run back to the Father S's house. He could have changed the meaning of the word betrayal forever. But he chose the tree. He chose the rope. He chose the end. And since then, for 2,000 consecutive years, his name has become synonymous with eternal betrayal. Even today, we still use the name Judas as a heavy insult, as a curse, as the worst thing you can call someone when you really want to hurt them. Judas is the torn cry of someone who has been deeply betrayed. And perhaps, just perhaps, it should be completely different. Perhaps the name Judas should be a constant and powerful reminder to all of humanity. It is not too late. It's not too far. It's not too deep. It's not too dirty. It's not too horrible. It never is. Because in the absolute end, when we peel back all the layers, this whole alternative narrative we've constructed today isn't about rewriting the Bible or changing what really happened. It's about deeply understanding what has always been written there, that Peter denied Jesus 3 times, with profanity and all, and was completely forgiven and became a leader of the church. That Paul, before being Paul, was Saul, and Saul literally killed Christians, dragged entire families to prison, destroyed lives, and became the greatest apostle in history. That the thief crucified on the cross next to Jesus did absolutely nothing good, didn't have time to change his life, didn't have a chance to fix anything. Only asked, that's all. Only asked and gained paradise that same day. The door was always wide open. Judas just didn't go in. He stayed outside, watching, and chose death. And if you're watching this now, if you've endured this whole story until now, maybe it's because you know someone, or maybe it's you yourself who feels exactly like Judas that night. Someone who thinks, who is absolutely certain that they've done too much, that they've crossed the line. Someone who's looking at the rope, literally or metaphorically, and seriously thinking that there's no going back, that it's over, that tis is Italiana. So let me tell you something, looking you straight in the eyes, with all the sincerity I have. There is a way back. There's always a way back. Always. It doesn't matter the kiss you gave. It doesn't matter the 30 pieces of silver you pocketed. It doesn't matter the colossal size of the betrayal. It doesn't matter the abyss you fell into. God's grace is greater. It always has been greater. It always will be greater. Judas didn't need to die hanged from that cursed tree. And you don't need to die in your despair. Nobody does. Nobody does. Share this story now with someone who desperately needs to hear that no mistake, no sin, no betrayal is greater than God's boundless love. And may God be with you.